Manufacturing Matters is an MFG Radio Network production brought to you by GIE Media's Manufacturing Group as industry experts take deep dives into the latest manufacturing matters, whether it's new innovations, products, technologies, and emerging markets that help you understand better why manufacturing matters to you and also to the top companies in the medical, aerospace, defense, and electric vehicle manufacturing industries.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unraveling the Supply Chain as we head into 2024. I'm Elizabeth Engler-Modick, Editorial Director for GIE Media's Manufacturing Group of magazines, which is comprised of today's medical developments, aerospace manufacturing and design, EV design and manufacturing, and our newest publication, Defense and Munitions. Before we hear from Lisa Anderson, I would like to take a few moments to thank our 2023 series sponsors, ISCAR and Renishaw. ISCAR is the largest of the 15 companies comprising IMC, the International Metalworking Companies, and has been a leader for nearly 70 years in the development of a dynamic and comprehensive line of innovative precision carbide metalworking tools. They have developed industry-specific solutions to optimize productivity. They understand the unique requirements of each industry and continually improve and introduce new ideas for machining intelligently. And Renishaw, a global leader in developing technology that supports manufacturing process control. Renishaw offers an advanced range of calibration, measurement, positioning, and inspection solutions. Specified by leading OEMs around the world, Renishaw encoders, calibration, and measurement systems enable superior process control down to the nanometer and picometer levels. Now, just a little bit about Lisa Anderson. She is recognized as one of the top 1% of consultants worldwide and has deep experience partnering with manufacturers and distributors to maximize value. Lisa is the founder and president of LMA Consulting Group, which specializes in manufacturing strategy and end-to-end supply chain transformation that maximizes the customer experience and enables profitable, scalable, dramatic business growth. Known for creating bold customer promises and profits, she is experienced in working with closely held, private equity-backed, and large complex organizations in a range of industries. So, without further ado, welcome, Lisa.
Excellent. Well, we are going to talk today about unraveling the supply chain. It's certainly continues to be a critical topic. So I thought I'd start off with our supply chain went global many years ago, and it became far more complex than it was in the old days. And it really became more of a system of systems and challenges, which became heightened during the pandemic. And so now we're experiencing a whole new set of challenges post-pandemic because of this complexity and how all these systems are intertwined together. So I thought we'd talk a bit today about all the geopolitics and how this relates to the supply chain, since we have such a interconnected supply chain throughout the world. And then what do we do about all this? Now I'm going to go through, I'm not going to read everything on these slides because there's a lot of information, but I wanted you to have the information for the archives, but I'm going to hit on some highlights. So first of all, the Russia-Ukraine war has certainly created problems in the oil and natural gas sector, which is of critical importance. Mainly, they're supplying Europe and they were supplying Europe and elsewhere. It's also affecting commodities, so it's impacting food, fertilizer, aluminum, nickel, etc., which is used in a whole host of items such as medical equipment and airplanes and much more. So there's significant challenges happening related to the Russia-Ukraine war, and it really has not stopped Russia because they're just simply selling their oil to places like India and China instead of Europe. Next up is China-Taiwan tensions. That is probably the largest risk we have in the global supply chain. There's no doubt that China is there's all sorts of things we'll talk about. So one thing to mention here is that Taiwan produces 90% of the advanced computer chips in the world. And, Russia, China, and Taiwan also have the vast majority of all computer chips produced. And so that brings new meaning to these military exercises and problems happening between China and Taiwan. Also, according to Brookings, China produces 60% of the rare earths and processes 85% of the rare earths for the world, which is huge. So when it comes to the chips, what we're doing about it is the U.S. is investing in chips manufacturing, thank goodness, which I've listed at the bottom of the slide for your reference. And Europe has it. They're not as far along, but they have a similar CHIPS Act going on. It doesn't solve all of these issues, but it helps to alleviate some of the potential risk, but certainly not enough of the potential risk. Now, China is of high, we should be on high alert, in essence. So China is number one in manufacturing in the world. They produce almost 30% of the world's output. That is significant if you think about that. And critical supplies are manufactured in China, which is particularly more concerning than the volume. So, for example, active pharmaceutical ingredients, the equipment required for our electrical grids. Without that, nothing will happen. Mining for rare earths, lithium for batteries, and much more. So there is a whole pile of risk here that we must address if we wish to, whichever companies wish to thrive in the next couple of decades will be proactively working this issue. China also actually has like the worst available water capacity that you can imagine. It's just not in the news. But according to the UN's definition, the China's northern China plains per capita available water supply is just the worst level of scarcity that you can think of. So it's actually pretty horrific, their water supply, which water is required in manufacturing of, obviously water is required for normal things, but it's also required for manufacturing. And as I said, they're 30% of the manufacturing output. Electricity is the other thing required for manufacturing. And they use, all of this conversation about, going green is being offset by China. They're going in the opposite direction, to be sure, when it comes to electricity. But they use 60% coal, 20% hydro, which is a problem with the water scenario, and 20% nuclear, solar, and wind. But they're producing new coal. They're permitting new coal plants on a weekly basis. So it's pretty insane. Their zero COVID policy proved that they can cut the world off if they need to or want to. And they want to control the South China Seas, so that's quite problematic because for all the other Asian countries, they have to go through the South China Seas. And I mentioned rare earths already. So there's quite a bit of risk when it comes to China. On the Panama Canal, that's like a whole nother new shipping lane problem set. So the Panama Canal has 40% market share for the containers moving goods from the northeast of Asia to the U.S. East Coast. They obviously move other goods as well, but that's a significant market share. And there's been drought conditions that have created a host of problems in the Panama Canal that are not getting better. They're not expected to get better even until perhaps later in 2024. So basically, they've reduced the number of container ships by more than 50%, or they will have reduced them by more than 50% by early next year. That is a large number. So those container ships have to go somewhere else or they're delayed. etc. So as we, supply chain disruptions are not a thing of the past. It's just there's pockets of disruptions, and you have to know. Unfortunately, you have to know more about what's going on in order to navigate and thrive in these conditions. They also put restrictions on the ship draft, which basically means that several of the loads that do go through the Panama Canal have to be unloaded. Part of their product has to be unloaded, shipped by rail, and then reloaded at the other end of the canal. So that's a big deal. And actually, the gas carriers are probably experiencing the largest impacts as well. And there's a lot more inflationary pressures coming because of this problem. For example, there's some ships paying up to $4 million to get to the head of the line. So that's a big number, to say the least. To add fuel to the fire here on our China story, they happen in quotes, to own the Hutchison ports, which are on both ends of the Panama Canal. So as we experienced with zero COVID, both sides of the Panama Canal could shut down if so decided. So we shall see how that goes. So folks have to mitigate risk, and they're looking at alternate routes, and they're already starting to take that through the Suez Canal. Or they're going around the southern tip of Africa or South America, different modes of transportation, which of course add cost. So there's quite a bit going on in the Panama Canal that is just one of many issues going on in the world. Regulations would definitely be another problem. So we have a whole host that I'm not gonna like talk through all of these, but suffice it to say that the bottom line on all the regulations that are happening is that the goal is good. We wanna have a cleaner, green environment going forward. However, if we go back to the China story, if we're offsetting what we do, everything that we do by tenfold in China, pollution does travel. But nevertheless, if we were to meet these regulations, the main problem is that there's two main problems. One is that the timing is way too aggressive. Like basically there is no hope to meet many of these regulations on time. The second is that the technology doesn't yet exist, which is problematic. Now, the good news is that there's vast progress that's been made, which has the industry extremely frustrated because there's a lot of progress, but it's nowhere near going to meet the regulations. And what does that really mean? It means that there's like lots of fines, i.e. inflationary pressures, and frustration, people getting out of the industry, and a consolidation that will go on because the people who remain are going to be willing to deal with this problem and absorb these extra costs, which is going to be a challenge, and that they'll of course be passed on to consumers and other businesses. So basically, there's like truck regulations. And there's, lots of, like, for example, this is kind of crazy, but, for the electric vehicle trucks that don't yet exist, they basically, to have a zero emission truck, they don't exist yet to go over 100 miles. And the old trucks goes 1,000 miles. So that's like, it's a very, very much shorter distance that you can go, but that's not the end of the story because it takes 32 times longer to charge, which is extreme if you think about like how quickly our supply chain moves and that we have to have products at destinations. We're all about the Amazon like service these days, same day delivery. Well, we can't have trucks charging for 32 times longer. If they were to even if they could find an electrical grid, or a charging station and electrical grid, they would be in good luck having 32 times longer to charge. So it's quite the barrel of problems over here. There's the container shipping and ports have been working on this for quite a while and have made a lot of progress, but even they aren't where they need to be. Rail also has been making a lot of progress, but yet they're not where they need to be. And some are going to go, like I said earlier, like insolvent, or they're going to, there's inflationary pressures with all of this. So, we will get to solutions, but wanted to give you the big picture, because as you're thinking about it from a business standpoint, we have to be thinking about what is it that's what risks are we willing to absorb? What does our customers expect? Like, what kind of lead times are they asking for? What kind of pricing are they willing to pay? And how do we set up our supply chain to be, what's going to deliver the goods, if you will? So going on to talent and technology, we have, well, unfortunately, a slew of problems here too. Actually, the biggest thing I hear in working with manufacturing distribution clients is that they simply don't have the high skilled workers. I understand that the statistics are showing that, the unemployment rates are, increasing, which would imply that there's more people available. But for the folks that are needed in the skilled roles that we have today, because after all, the rest is being automated, they simply don't exist. So workforce participation is down since the pandemic, and just down overall. And even though it doesn't look like a big percentage difference from prior, it's big in terms of people. Like I said, there's a scarcity of skilled labor. And what are clients doing? Of course, they're thinking about, how in the world do I survive this if I want to survive at all? So they're automating, digitizing their supply chain, which only makes sense. So according to McKinsey, automation will account for 25% of the industrial company's capital spending over the next 5 years, which is significant. And Gartner predicts that by 2026, 75% of large enterprises will have adopted some form of intralogistics smart robots. Not surprising at all, because after all, you simply won't have the people. Which does make some of these, like, for example, the union negotiations going on in some of these logistics industries like the ports problematic, because they are not in favor of automation. So it's just a problem, because how will the two ends meet in the middle? So nevertheless, we have technology, which is these are the two sides of the coin, right? So from a technology standpoint, we really have to focus more attention on cyber attacks. I've had multiple clients over the years here recently that have had some sort of a cyber attack. And this is, they are not uncommon. And they are typically speaking the smarter of the bunch, because they hire consultants, they bring on the appropriate IT resources, etc. And yet they still have had cyber attacks. So it is something that you must address. And ERP, which is the system you use to basically run any manufacturing distribution business, ship, receive, invoice, etc. You must have a modern system. It's no longer going to be acceptable to have an ancient, archaic system. Although, actually, I've made many of those systems work much more effectively for clients. And you can always use any system better than you did previously. The customer requirements are simply elevated to a level that you need to have a system that will meet them, and automate, digitize, allow you to be more efficient and effective. So, and it goes beyond ERP to some of these topics you hear about in the news. I mean, if everyone isn't talking about AI these days, if you haven't heard it, you're probably hiding under a rock. It's incorporated into many of these ERP systems, and there's like other, there's certainly predictive analytics, basically what's going to happen in the future, and those types of things that are really quite key and visibility in your supply chain. After all, if you are going to have a really complex supply chain, and they will be more complex than they were in the really old days where you vertically integrated, you must know where something is at all times and what's happening. And most clients and systems simply don't have that information. So that's quite critical. Data is another really key attribute. Really, lots of clients have an overload of information, but the problem is whether they can do something with it that's meaningful. And so that's really the key. Can you turn your data into insights and do something with it to better manage the business? That is the trick. And it really is not as easy as it sounds, although it's not necessarily a technical problem, although there's technical issues related to it. And then, as I said, keeping up with regulations is a full-time endeavor, and the technology will relate to that topic as well. We also have inflation, recession. What's going on in today's world? Well, I realize that the statistics are showing that the inflation numbers are coming down. However, they are still higher than the rates they're still higher than goal, and they have no there's no like thinking that they're going to get to goal anytime soon. But more importantly than that, inflation is really the issue here is that like inflation went up big numbers. It depends on your industry. It depends on what materials you're purchasing or what shipping, what your main cost drivers are for the particular business that you're working in. However, generally speaking, prices have gone up dramatically than from pre-pandemic levels. So even if the future prices are going to be 3 to 4% higher every year, that's like not a comforting position if you already lost 20%, 50% of in price increases that you haven't been able to pass along in price increases, cost increases that you haven't been able to pass along in price increases. And that's the situation that most companies find themselves in. Is quite the trick to offset all of the price increases, including labor costs, because labor costs have gone up a lot. I mean, if you think about all these just supply chain related costs that have gone up simply due to these union negotiations, it's going to have companies in a much a less profitable position, which is simply not acceptable to most boards and investors. So it means that they have to do something. And what is that something? Well, it depends. You may be laying off people, but I would have to say be very careful about who you're going to lay off and when, because you might just be laying off your company, like your ability to function. So it's quite the trick. So that's why people are moving to technology and digitization of their supply chain. And really simply, only the smart, proactive, innovative, forward-thinking companies will thrive, but they will have more business than they know what to do with. The good news there for them is they'll be able to choose their customers, and they will have a big separation between the winners and the losers in the next several years. So the question is, which side will you be on? And it's up to you, really. I mean, everyone has the opportunity to address this, but it's not, unfortunately, you have to address some harsh realities and think about what's your unique position in this, not just the global supply chain, but business environment. So on the other hand, we have recessionary trends, which is what a lot of people are talking about, especially with some of the latest statistics. Of course, the rapid increase in interest rates has led many businesses to be definitely much more concerned about inventory levels. It's kind of interesting since I've been doing consulting for as many years as I have. When I first started consulting, there was a lot of interest on inventory levels and how to reduce inventory levels. And, we were able to reduce inventory levels, depends on the situation, but 30 to 50%, which is huge. And that was a big interest. But then in the middle, there has been very little interest on inventory, mainly because it was so cheap to have, lines of credit or loans to have excess inventory, and customer expectations were rising through the roof. Now it's not so cheap anymore, but customer expectations are still significant. So again, thinking about utilizing ERP and some of the other business processes approaches to improve this is really quite key. We'll talk more about that. And we also should be proactively looking at pricing strategies, which we'll talk about profitability models. So what do we do about all this? The US, the smart companies are reshoring. Like, for example, according to the Reshoring Initiative 2022 data report, the CHIPS Act and Infrastructure Act has led to another all-time high of 53%. For example, like Intel's reshoring to Ohio, expanding capacity in Arizona. Tesla's expanding its Texas Gigafactory. I've had many clients that have gained orders due to a lot of the large companies that are reshoring. And there's other companies that are reshoring just quietly, because who in the world would tell their current supplier that they're going to reshore partial or all of their volume ahead of time? And they don't, of course they don't want that news out there, because then who will be supported? Not them, certainly. No, there's also nearshoring that's huge right now. Mexico has become the top trading partner to the US, which is a newer thing, because China was top trading partner before. But like HP and Dell are moving to Mexico. There's been significant announcements on Mexico, so it's definitely a hot spot. And there's also nearshoring to Latin America. I've given some examples here. Is generally speaking the less technical types of products, because you have to think about this. When you're nearshoring, where are you going? Do you have the workforce you need? Do you have the skills? Because you could go somewhere. I actually had a client that did this before I started working with them. They built a plant, and then there's no people to run the plant. Like, that is not helpful. What are you going to do about it? Like, literally fly people in to run the plant? And in some cases, that's what people are doing. But, you have to be concerned about your workforce. What did I talk about before? Water, electricity, geopolitical problems, the Panama Canal. I mean, are the ports run by China? There's all sorts of things to worry about. So be making sure you're looking at all this. And then there's also India seen with vast potential for expansion. There's plenty of infrastructure challenges there. But like, for example, Apple is moving to India. So there's quite a bit of diversification of risk is the best way to put it. And unraveling, re-raveling of the supply chain, if you will. Europe is doing the same thing. I won't go through all of this, but in essence, they are reshoring. Like, for example, Germany and France have always been like the larger manufacturing areas. And so, of course, they're getting most of the reshoring. Britain's down a little bit, but they're still seen as business friendly. And we also have quite a bit of nearshoring in Eastern and Southern Europe. They are definitely like even further into the sustainability reporting and concerned about energy. They simply don't have or they no longer have the resources to support, to self-support. So they have to be concerned about their energy roadmap. So there's quite a bit going on in the EU that has them revamping their supply chain. And actually Japan too, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but Japan's doing the same thing. In essence, they're they're also reshoring. They've always been known as, you know, the Toyota production system started in Japan, so they're clearly experts that way, but they're partnering with countries like the US, and they are leaning on their expertise. So they're making a comeback, if you will. Now, from a talent and technology standpoint, you really must take control is really the deal. And taking control is the theme throughout, because what I was just talking about as far as reshoring and nearshoring is taking control. So you must take control. Doesn't mean you have to take 100% control and vertically integrate, although some companies are, but you must be in control and actually know that you really are, because who your partners are and who your partners are along the way could definitely dictate what happens to you. So from a talent point of view, you really need to secure your talent. I mean, after all, if you think about it just logically, we have a problem here. It's kind of it's across the world, but we'll use the US as an example. So the US baby boomers many retired during the pandemic, which caused part of this problem because, of course, their knowledge went with them. And they're still retiring. And that was the largest generation. So we simply don't have the expertise that we had before. The generation following the baby boomers is simply not as large. And I can tell you from experience, as every client has, no client has, and they're all overwhelmed. They have simply not enough resources that know what they are doing. And when I say that, I mean, there's a lot that is learned through experience, and there's a lot of education that has to happen along the way, even with smart young talent. So there is quite the bottleneck. It's the number one thing that executives talk about. Simply the number one thing. So really, you know, it's not rocket science. It's really obvious from seeing multiple clients that the ones that treat their employees well, that they also hold them accountable, but they treat their employees well, they appreciate them, and they are looking for the future and developing people, keep their people, and the other ones lose their people. I mean, after all, the good ones are going to be looking for talent, and since they simply don't exist, they're going to have to steal them. And which are you going to be? It's really the bottom line. And you also no longer can just think someone else is going to take care of educating and training your people. They simply don't have the knowledge. So you're going to have to support programs and education programs. Like several clients are utilizing us as consultants to fill some gaps and educate the people who are going to take over, or, you know, to supplement their workforce. I also lead the Association for Supply Chain Management, ASCM, formerly APIX, and they offer some really great fundamental type of training. There's a difference between training and education, but training that provides at least a fundamental knowledge. So anyway, there's a lot of programs with community colleges, and there's also manufacturing and supply chain technical talent that we have to be thinking about the importance of not necessarily university degrees, but technical skills colleges and you know, other programs. So anyway, there's a lot that you could talk about with talent. Technology is the same. Like I said, if we're going to be dependent on our talent and technology, we better be focused on our talents and technology. So as I mentioned before, if you don't have a modern ERP type of system, you better get one now. One of the things that we also do is help clients select ERP systems, the appropriate ones for their type of company. And it really is no easy task, unfortunately, because there's a lot of sharks in that industry. And it's just not easy because it means you have to upgrade and or change, modify your business processes to implement any new ERP system. Obviously, it's better to upgrade them than to keep them the same. However, that's requires what? High skilled talent and resources and a lot of money, which is also difficult. So it's really not the simplest of problems. So the question is how to navigate all this. It's really advisable to be thinking and making sure you plan that out effectively, because as important as ERP is, it also can be one of the things that can take your business down quicker than anything else. So it's quite important to make sure you do that well, and that you're also pursuing the advancements. So, like, for example, robotics, predictive analytics, digital twins, which basically means you can do what if type of analysis, and you can shorten timeframes for key activities like product development and even forward planning, which we'll talk about coming up. So there's quite a bit that you should be thinking about and doing when it comes to technology and innovation as well. Innovation could be related to, other aspects of the business than the pure like system side of the piece. So from a customer point of view, listen to your customers, of course, but you really want to be thinking about who are your supply chain partners? Who are your customers? Are they really the people you want? If you're willing to do all these things I've been talking about, you're going to have your choice. So choose wisely. It's pretty much the bottom line. And then you want to be thinking smartly. You want to be looking at supply chain visibility. You want to right size your inventory. You want to have resiliency in your supply chain. There's a lot of things we could be talking about. You want to manage your supply chain risk in a smart way. So there's quite a bit that you need to do to be thinking about how to have customer success, and for which customers. Because after all, I can definitely tell you that the 20% of the customers that cause you the most havoc, frustrate your best players, and you lose money on, are the ones that you don't even make money serving. So do you want them? I don't know. It's a really good question these days. Probably not. So there's quite a bit on customer side. Another key program that I think is one of the best business processes that help folks navigate these times is what's called SIOP, Sales Inventory Operations Planning, or it's also got the name S&OP, which is Sales and Operations Planning. It's all the same. And even sometimes it's called IBP, which is Integrated Business Planning, because of course they wouldn't want to give you, no one in supply chain wants to give you one name for something. They want to give you 10 names. But nevertheless, I go with SIOP because inventory is a key piece, and that's the I. So what does this really mean? It means, how do you look forward and figure out what your customers are going to need? I mean, that's the bottom line. What customers are you even going to serve? You need to be doing customer product profitability, which gets integrated into these SIOP processes. But in addition, where are your customers? In what regions? Where will they be growing? Which ones do you want to emphasize? What products are going to be the products for the future? All of those questions are answered by looking at some demand planning strategies and sales forecasting strategies and customer programs looking forward. That's really the key. You start there. And then one of the things that most clients, if they can get that far, the problem is, what do you do with it? And so then the key is, how do you know what this means in terms of capacity? And when I say capacity, I mean manufacturing capacity. So where is this manufacturing capacity? Is it in a zone we've been talking about? Are you reshoring some of it? What are you doing? So what capacity do you have? Where is it compared to your customers? Like, if all your customers are in the West Coast of the US, is your manufacturing capacity in Europe, for example? Well, that's like pretty far. And how many bad zones does it have to go through, as an example? So, there's quite a few things to think about. But there's capacity of manufacturing. There's capacity of your logistics infrastructure, which includes distribution, transportation, which goods movement, meaning container ships, rail, trucks, all these things I've been talking about. There's capacity of even buildings. Like, do you have the buildings you need? So there's quite a bit, and there's people capacity. Do you have the skills? There's technology capacity. So there's a lot of capacities to think about, and the SIOP process tells you, in essence, what it is that you need to be doing. So it's a great roadmap to align your demand with your supply in a way that achieves profitability. And I've included a link here to a book that recently published. It's on Amazon and iTunes, or you can get a free download by participating today, and put the link there. So what does this all mean for going forward into 2024? Is that I think we have the largest opportunity probably ever in history, but certainly since the Great Depression. And I'm certainly not hoping for another Great Depression, and we don't necessarily have to go into one. So let's hope we avoid that. But the opportunities will still be here. And what I mean by that is to navigate the level of geopolitical challenges going on in the world, which relates to supply chain. Because even if you have all of your manufacturing located in whatever country you're selling to, so let's say the US, because there's a lot of consumers in the US and you're producing in the US, fabulous. However, do you have all your materials, all of your supplies, and everything else required to support you coming from the US as well? Probably not. There's very few companies that are, well, vertically integrated would be, the extreme, but even have all of their supplies throughout the supply chain, end-to-end supply chain, in one country. So it's just rare. And so really from that point of view, you are dealing with global complexity, geopolitical challenges. You're dealing with extended lead times, because the lead time, I have recently had multiple examples come up where an entire critical shipment for in the aerospace industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, and in the electrical powers industry, shut down production because of missing labels. Doesn't that sound absolutely insane? Or they were delayed severely. So and that's just one extreme example, but there's more than labels. Obviously, labels should not be a problem, really, if you have all those pieces in place, but they have been a problem for some really good companies. So if you think about labels, there's a ton of materials, components, and other supplies coming from around the world. So you really need to be thinking about all the aspects of your supply chain, to performing an assessment and understanding. So now if you think about this complexity, and you also think about the talent and the technology and all the other pieces, that's going to require investment. We also have the high interest rate environment, higher than it's been in many years. It's certainly not the highest it's ever been, that's for sure. But what all this means is that some companies are going to struggle, and it's simply going to be too much for them to keep up. They don't feel like they have the resources to invest in the appropriate talent. They don't feel like they have the resources to invest in the technology. They don't feel like they have they aren't willing to spend the extra money, if you will, in quotes, because if you look at the reshoring institutes, like actual calculations, reshoring could, the cost to produce something in the US, depends where, of course, but in the US could be lower than what all the costs it takes to get it from China, let's say. And it certainly is less expensive in Mexico. However, it actually could be less expensive in the US, because it just depends on what your supply chain is and all that's involved. But nevertheless, if you look at that equation, What it means is that those companies are going to slowly dwindle and or sell, right? Because they may have some people who want to retire that are leading the company or own the company. So they may sell, go bankrupt, slowly dwindle. They're basically going to be moving on out of the supply chain over time. And so what happens to those customers? Well, if you're one of the people that has done the opposite in all the things that I'm recommending today, you will have your choice. And so you can decide which customers are really the best fit for your business. And you can, you'll have more opportunities than ever before in history. That happened during the Great Depression as well. And the companies that spent, did some smart investing in terms of people, marketing, etc., shot to the top of their industry and stayed there for many decades. So I believe that that same opportunity is going to exist in the future. So I'd love for folks to take advantage of it. The other thing that's going to happen here in the future is those folks that'll be successful are going to be focusing on supply chain resiliency. And that really has to do with, like, for example, we talked about the geopolitical issues. Do you have backup sources of supply? It sounds like a common sense thing to do, but it's an uncommon common sense thing to do, to have backup sources of supply. And then the question would be is, are your backup sources of supply in the same region, perhaps, let alone the same country, but the same region with the same problems? That would be problematic. Or do you have a backup source of supply somewhere else that you can actually rely upon? Then that's the question. Can you rely upon them? Because you may set up a backup source of supply, but if you are not purchasing from them continually, will they be there when you need them? And I can tell you the answer is going to be no, because anytime you really need them, other people are going to need them too. So I didn't realize how smart this was at the time, but when I was a vice president of operations for a mid-market manufacturer, the director of purchasing that worked for me insisted that we have a backup source of supply for one of our key raw materials, because we got the main source of supply from Brazil, and that there was there's definitely shipping issues and other problems associated with Brazil. So we did get a backup source of supply, but it was a really big problem because the board of directors did not appreciate us spending extra money, extra in quotes, of course, on this backup source of supply. So they were constantly giving me trouble, not just about that, but they wanted me to fire basically all of the the resources that I had in labor, even though that wasn't the biggest cost driver. So it would have been easy to make the wrong decision, but luckily I had a great CEO. He's supportive, and we did purchase 20% of our materials from the backup source of supply, which was in South Carolina, and they were more expensive, but we purchased 20% of our materials from them, which turned out to be a brilliant decision because, as luck would have it, Brazil did have issues with their it was really a port strike problems that came up, and we had to turn on our backup source of supply to produce more than 20% of our product for us, and they were willing to do it because we had been purchasing from them all along. Of course, they had many other customers providing, asking for orders and providing higher price offers, if you will. So that turned out to be the right thing to do. But it's not the easy thing to do. And that's the same thing with labor, because if we had said, sure, yes, I'll reduce the number of people I have in manufacturing because you're so worried about these labor costs, which is understandable because, they're trying to make a profit. It's private equity backed. However, we needed the high-skilled people to figure out how we could actually reduce the cost of materials over time without negatively impacting the customers. And so we stayed with our guns, which wasn't easy to do. And we were able to successfully launch new products and improve our reduce our waste on the production line by utilizing the people that they wanted us to get rid of. So anyway, long story short is you have to be willing to take the appropriate risks, push back when it's not easy. And but those folks who do that are going to be very successful in the supply chain of the future. So I think we'll answer some questions. Oh, you know what? I have one more thing to say. I forgot about this. So I have another special report that you can download on what's happening in business, supply chain, and the world order. And there's a lot of information on nearshoring, reshoring, and all the topics I've been talking about today. So feel free to get your download. All right, so go ahead with the questions.
Great, Lisa. Thanks for the presentation and insights. And we do have a question in here from Gary. He wants to know if you see manufacturers increasing some or all of their inventory as a way to mitigate supply chain issues in availability and lead times, as opposed to years ago where it was, more on demand.
Yeah, so I see, for sure, clients have been increasing the inventory like during the pandemic. They definitely increased them. What I see now is that they're in a quandary because they realize that the interest rates are going up. They're trying to tightly manage cash and their ability to invest. At the same time, they need to service customers. So overall, I would say the smart clients are willing to invest in more of the right inventory. And the right inventory means you have to have a focus on the appropriate planning systems, meaning like, are we purchasing it? Which materials are we purchasing and how many from who? Where are we going to store them? How, what are we going to be producing? So the entire planning process is there's some best practices. So what they're doing is implementing best practices in their inventory planning processes, which goes from materials, production, replenishment, and beyond. And they are optimizing their inventory. Overall, they do have more inventory of the right items with this approach. But what I'm seeing is clients that aren't leading edge, they are on a path of inventory reduction currently. Now, some of it could be the appropriate thing to do because they had to also bring on some excess inventory during the pandemic that's not needed, but it just depends on the company and or client. Of course, if they're clients, we're working to help them right size it. But what I'm seeing is that overall folks are right sizing inventory and they're pre-positioning inventory. So that's another piece, which means that they're putting inventory closer to their customers. Again, you have to put the right inventory, but they're putting them closer to customers and or they are doing like final manufacturing operations closer to their customers. And they may be implementing technologies like 3D printing so they can more work on demand. So like customizing on the fly type of a concept. And so those are the strategies they're using to address that topic. It's a good question.
And we have another question here from John. For catalog house manufacturing companies, where do you see these types of companies benefiting from lean manufacturing? We are currently dealing with too much inventory.
Well, so lean manufacturing is, it's uncommon common sense is the way I see it. What isn't a good idea about eliminating waste, focusing on what your customer really needs, and being leaner in general, basically. However, what I really see is the issue is that most companies look at lean as like a program that they just like say, go implement lean, bring in a trainer, and like everything will be solved. And really nothing is solved because it's not that, it's a culture change. It's simply uncommon common sense to be honest with you. Like it was something before lean existed. We were doing lean, but it was really uncommon common sense. It provides a toolkit obviously, to improve things, but it's really more about implementing a culture change. So generally speaking, the answer would be yes, it's a good idea to be lean. However, what I would really say is, in combination with that, you should be really looking at your what I call planning or supply chain processes, because how do you right size the inventory in a way where you want to do three things when you're looking at the planning equation. And that's actually one of our sweet spots. That in SIOP is, how do you serve your customers with like on-time delivery and shorter lead times, if you will. I mean, there's other things, but those are the two main ones. So how do you do that with being most efficient, meaning like how do you increase your margins and be more profitable? And then the third thing is you have to do all of these at once. And the third is with less inventory tied up unnecessarily. So that's the planning process. So what I'd recommend is that looking at some best practices for that process. And then, and some of those relate also to lean manufacturing.
Lisa, thank you so much for the insights. We appreciate you joining us.
Excellent. Very good. I enjoyed it, and good luck to all with your unraveling your supply chain.
Wonderful. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You can listen to all of our episodes of Manufacturing Matters and Lunch and Learn podcast from the MFG Radio Network on Spotify, Apple Music, and on our websites, todaysmedicaldevelopments.com, aerospacemanufacturinganddesign.com, defenseandmunitions.com, and evdesignandmanufacturing.com.